Okay. Well, we will start. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank y'all so much for joining us tonight. We are the North Carolina branch of the International Dyslexia Association. My name is Friar Rayburn, and I am honored to introduce our speaker tonight, Jenny Creason. Jenny is a former second and third grade teacher in both public and private schools. She's a literacy facilitator for a local nonprofit. She is an Orton Gillingham tutor and dyslexia specialist. She holds a master's in education and literacy, and she's the owner of Open Mind Literacy in Charlotte, North Carolina. She's also a certified dyslexia practitioner and determined to spread awareness around structured literacy. Jenny, thank you so much for joining us tonight and leading us in a discussion on the sound symbol relationship and its relationship with phonics.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much, Friar. And thank you everyone who's joining us. I've gotten a few texts requesting if there are notes, and there is a simple document that's been uploaded for your enjoyment. If you can't access it now, we can always send it over to you. It's fairly simple. I think tonight's presentation will sort of speak for itself. So again, thank you all for hosting this. As Prior mentioned, I'm really passionate about spreading awareness around literacy instruction and how we can get that to pre-service teachers and then get it to teachers that are already in the classroom. Because if I told you a story about a former third grade teacher who every single year had students on her roster, regardless of where I taught, that were not proficient readers. And I told you that that third grade teacher was not equipped to remediate their reading because I hadn't fully conceptualized the sound symbol relationship myself. So obviously that former teacher is me, and now that I have the information that I do, it's really important to me that I get it out. So tonight we're going to talk about phonics instruction, and I'm hoping that for some of you this will be a bit of a paradigm shift for you as you think about phonics and exactly what it means in regards to reading instruction. So let's jump right in. So let's see here. So first of all, it's important to start with sort of a foundational principle here called the alphabetic principle. And it goes without saying that when we talk about reading instruction, everyone thinks, okay, the alphabet, right? You teach letters. And of course, that is an important piece, but it is important to know that the alphabetic principle is the idea and concept that letters and letter patterns represent the sounds of spoken language. And when I say that, initially, a lot of times people go, oh, you teach reading, and again, you must work with letters and all that. But really what I want you, a major piece that I want you to take from tonight's chat is that really the spoken language needs to be our starting place. So the words that come out of our mouth are actually the first step in providing our students and our children with the foundational pieces that will lead to hopefully lifelong readers. So let's look a little bit more about that. So I've got a little something up here, and I'll let you all take a peek at this. I'm not going to read every line of this, but I came across this little poem, and it really stuck with me. And over the years, I've kind of referenced it in the past. And I'm actually just going to read a stanza for you. And just follow along and let's see if we can kind of piece together what I'm kind of coming to here. It says, a moth is not the moth in mother, nor both in bother, broth and brother, and here is not a match for there, nor dear and fear for bear and pear. And then there's dose and rose and lows, just look them up, a goose and chose, and cork and work and card and war, and font and front and word and sword, and do and go and thwart and cart, come, I've hardly made a start, a dreadful language, man alive, I mastered it when I was 5. And though I consider myself a proficient reader at this stage, that was actually kind of difficult for me because what this poem highlights is the complexity of the English language. So the English language is one of the more complex languages, and a major piece of that is our sort of orthographic structure, the way that our language is structured. And so though, as I'm going to talk about, of course, our starting place very much so involves the letters, there's a much bigger piece here, and that would be the sounds that the letters make. and a wonderful sort of revered pioneer in reading instruction that I really admire this particular person. Dr. Louisa Moat said something that really stuck with me. She said, one of the most common errors in phonics programs is that kids will be taught, well, letters have sounds. And to be totally transparent, I think I've said that myself over the years, but here's the reality. The sounds existed first. The spoken language came long before someone had the wonderful idea to go ahead and write down those sounds that were coming out of our mouth. So as Dr. Moat says, the sounds existed first, and then we invented the letters to represent them. Reading is a cultural task, and therefore it needs to be explicitly taught. So the theme of tonight's chat is the concept that reading instruction really starts with our speech. So let's look at that specific starting place. And that starting place would be the sounds which we call phonemes. And phonemes are the individual sounds that make up the English language. And prior to knowing what I know now, I would have thought, well, gosh, there must be 26 sounds if there's 26 letters. Well, as I mentioned, English is quite complex. And just to keep it all interesting for us, there are in fact 44 total phonemes in the English language. And though we don't have time for me to assess and see if you know all 44, it took me a bit to sort of make sure I was familiar with all of them. And here I've got them up on the screen for you. So we won't go through them individually, but of course we have consonant sounds, and then we have vowel sounds, and then we have R-controlled sounds. We have sounds called diphthongs, which are vowels together making an individual vowel sound. We've got voiced sounds and unvoiced sounds, and needless to say, there are a lot of sounds that our students need to be taught, because they need to be able to then decode those in words and then retrieve them when it comes to spelling, and that's called encoding. So 44 individual sounds that make up this complex language known as English. And I bet a few of you are reading through that like, huh, that's weird, I didn't realize that one was a sound. Now, if you're thinking that I'm totally neglecting letters, and you're like, well, you know, Jenny, obviously letters are an important part. Of course they are. But what I want to, again, when we talk about this paradigm shift a bit, I want you to think about letters as really this term grapheme. And graphemes are the written symbol that represents the sound. And it could be one individual letter, such as B for book, or it could be multiple letters, such as IGH for the long vowel sound I. So when I'm saying phonemes, I'm saying the individual sounds. When I use the term grapheme, and we can see this root in here, graph, that means to write, that would mean the written symbol that we have created to represent those sounds. So again, I always come back to the complexity of the language, because once I learned more about how students read and write, I couldn't help but it's a miracle that any of us can. And so it's just such a privilege for me to be able to kind of pass on this information and hope that it connects with some of you, whether it's your own children or whether it's students of yours or perhaps a colleague or a friend that you think would benefit from this information. So I wanted to provide you with a little bit more sort of specific information about letters. And the source that I'm using here is a wonderful text called Multisensory Teaching. Our own Nancy Hennessy has a chapter that she's written in here, but this is just a really valuable resource for anyone who's fascinated by multisensory structured literacy. And I wanted to point out these sort of three major thoughts here. So we've got letters are the written symbols, again, so the code that we use to put what comes out of our mouth onto paper, or perhaps rock at the time, that are cognitively processed to make reading possible. Letter names are the only property of a letter that does not change. And that's a really interesting concept. Letter sizes can change if we have uppercase, and their sounds can change, which it's a bit mind-blowing when we think about trying to teach children to read and then they come across the letter C only to realize that C can actually make two different sounds depending on what comes after it. And another thought is that letter names are really the catalyst for learning the letter sounds. So though, again, I'll go back to the idea that letter sounds are really how we want our students to begin processing this language, I also want you to know that, yes, of course, it is important that our students know and can rapidly recall the letter names. And in the Birch book, it talks about knowing the letter names provides a springboard for then learning and remembering those letter sound relationships. So if we think of each grapheme that represents a sound, that's going to allow, and we bestow that information to our students, that's really going to allow them to begin cracking the code of the English language. So here's a few sort of major thoughts as we think about how does this impact our instruction or the way that we communicate with students. And though I, of course, am a big alphabet song, I have sung it, I have learned it, I use it, I sing it to my son. Simply starting with that alphabet song and that alphabet song alone just isn't enough. It's not effective enough because it doesn't include really the most important part, which would be the sound or phoneme associated with the letter. So don't eradicate it from your daily life, but in addition to that, we want you to incorporate activities that are going to promote that letter sound correspondence. So we're then going to explicitly teach each of those sounds, and we're going to start with the most common, and we're going to on that, and we're going to expose our students and use repetition. And I'm going to show you something here in a minute or two that if you happen to be a classroom teacher, this could be a really effective route to do that. And then kind of bringing this, as we're unpacking this concept of the sound symbol relationship, thinking about the idea that phonics instructions allows students to explore that relationship between the sounds and the symbols, and we're teaching them that as we go. Okay, some students are going to naturally absorb a lot of those things, but what the science and the research tells us is that the vast majority of our children really need explicit, direct instruction in that arena. Okay, so we're going to incorporate that into our classrooms, whether we teach kindergarten, first, second grade, and even into third and fourth grade. These students will benefit from some of the higher level phonics instruction that we can provide. So let's look at sort of what the phonics instruction should look like. And I had a friend ask once, well, that's just word work, right? And there's some truth to that, because of course, as you can tell, based on my presentation, phonics absolutely involves the words and the language, but it's so much more than just simple word sorts. It's going to be systematic, okay? We're going to have a plan. We're going to follow a scope and sequence. We're going to start, as I mentioned, with the most common and frequent sounds, and we're going to build on those. We're going to build on the complexity. It needs to be explicit and direct instruction. We want to show our students exactly about the different sounds, and we're going to show them that DGE at the end of a word spells the sound J after a short vowel, and it's going to be multisensory. And I could talk for hours about multisensory, but I won't. And when I use this acronym VAKT, that stands for visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and tactile. And the idea there is that we're going to be incorporating all of those modalities in our teaching because the science shows us that that promotes retention. When we do it in a multisensory way, our students are much more likely to retain that information, particularly students that happen to have a learning disorder such as dyslexia. But here's the wonderful news. Even if your student don't happen to have dyslexia, they will still benefit from this multisensory instruction. And I'm here to tell you that it is more fun. It's more fun to do things when we're tapping out the sounds and drawing them using our two fingers on a tactile surface. So the instruction is going to be so much more than a simple word sort. And let's look a little bit more. All right, what I've got for you on the screen is a suggestion for any of you in the classroom or pre-service teachers. I know I have a few of my students from Queens on here tonight. So hi guys, they had to stick with me earlier today for 2 hours. So you guys are troopers to join me again. But I've got a sound wall. And over the years, as a former classroom teacher, I never had one of these. I had a word wall, I had a vocabulary wall, I had a genre wall, but I'd never had a sound wall. And if you take a peek at what I have on here, I've got some of our sort of basic consonant sounds here. I've got our b, t, k. But notice if you look directly before the k sound, I have the different spellings. I have the different graphemes that represent the same sound. Because we want our students to know when they hear k in a word, they're going to have to make a decision. Do I use the C? Do I use the K? or do I use the CK? And how do I know when to do that? And we're going to give them explicit direction on how to do that. So I'm going to give you a second just to kind of peek at my sound wall, and it would be maybe a good chance if there are any questions that I could answer before I move forward. So take a peek here and let's see if anyone has any questions about what I've posted on my sound wall or any of the information I've shared so far. And Hallie, you can let me know if someone has something pressing or we can wait till the end. So I wanted to show you, if there are no questions, I'll kind of move ahead here, but.
So, one question was, how many sounds do you teach at a time?
Oh, that's a great question. So I would say that that is going to depend on if we're in a one-on-one scenario or if we're in a whole group. So I'm just going to answer both quickly. If I am working one-on-one with a student who perhaps has some additional learning difficulties such as dyslexia, I'm most likely going to teach one sound at a time. Now, one piece of effective structured literacy is that it's very prescriptive and diagnostic. So I'm going to be reading my students' needs. If my student is picking up these sounds, just adding them to their tool belt, processing them with fluidity and automaticity, I'm going to move forward, and maybe the next time I'll do two. But I would say to start off, you would want to teach each one of these, let's say CK, I'll focus on that particular grapheme that represents the sound K. I would do this in one lesson. If I were a classroom teacher, I'll pretend like I'm a first grade teacher. I think that I would introduce this to my sound wall on a Monday and have my students practice with CK words throughout the week, and probably stick with that particular grapheme through the week before moving on. So there's not one specific answer for that, but I think as always, what we're doing is we're reading our students and we're looking for mastery. Are your students able to, A, recognize the sound immediately? If I hold up a sound card that says CK, can your students automatically say K? Can they read words that contain the CK digraph? Luck, sick, stuck. And then can they spell words that contain the CK digraph? And if you are seeing mastery with that consistently, I would go ahead and move on. So I hope that answers the question. Right, so just back to my sound wall quickly here, and you'll notice that of course I don't have all the sounds on here, and I don't have all the spellings on here because there are a tremendous amount, but I'm building on each of these concepts, and I'm allowing my students to see that when they hear A in a word, when you hear long A, whether that's in the word ape or flake or acorn, I'm going to teach them that the most common way to spell that would be the grapheme A or letter A, but then we also have the syllable type A blank E, and then we have the diphthong AI, which also says the sound A. And believe it or not, there are actually 5 more ways to spell long A, but I won't bore you with all of those. So let's kind of, I know we've unpacked little pieces of the phonics instruction, but I really like this visual here that shows, this is sort of called the hourglass, Tolman's hourglass. And what it does is it shows us that as we're working towards lifelong strategic readers and spellers, we've got the phonological piece, which needs developing, needs support, needs explicit instruction. And Margaret Hemrick did a wonderful job last coffee chat going through that. And that, of course, focuses on the sounds. And then we have the orthography piece, which is the written portion, and phonics instruction brings that together. It's like the marriage between the two, the union of the sounds and the written part coming together, and we're going to provide for our students. So I love seeing this and seeing the idea that we are going to, part of phonics, you can see right from this visual, it's so much more than just word work or word sorts, which can be really valuable tool, but it's so much more than that. So phonics instruction is to explicitly teach our students how to marry or bring together the union of those 2 major principles within our English language. This the relationship between the king and the means. So, in summary, phonics is the union, the terminology, sound, and orthography, written rules. When we take those two concepts and we bring them for our students in a structured, explicit way, and we're going to incorporate that into our literacy instruction, that is where we have phonics. And it is safe to say that we need to have this in our schools. Okay, phonics isn't just for kindergarten, because I'm certainly not going to be teaching a kindergartner about DGE. That's a bit of an advanced trigraph there, but there is absolutely a need, and what the science, again, I always go back to the science. So I'm not a scientist in my next life perhaps, but the science shows us that the vast majority of students need this type of instruction in our schools and our classrooms. And so I'm hoping that today's presentation allowed you to see that phonics it can be really fun. There's so many ways to incorporate it, but it's not just a 15-minute blip in our day. It's going to be an important piece, a crucial component of our literacy instruction as we teach our students to recognize that the spoken word has been taken and put into a special code that happens to be our letters, and from there, them crack the code of reading. If you happen to want some ideas for activities, I did post some. I'm not exactly sure the avenue that you all get that, but we'll make sure that you have access to them. But I found 4 or 5 activities that I really liked that really promote letter sound correspondence. Uploaded those for you all. I'm also happy to speak with anyone in particular if you have specific questions. But for now, I will just wait and see if the Peanut Gallery has any questions.
Yeah, so Jenny, there's a few more. One was, is there significance to the colors on your sound wall?
Ooh, no. I just like the way those looked. I will say that I do always try and distinguish the vowel sounds. So typically I would differentiate those, but my particular colors were just based on aesthetics.
Nice. Another question was, should we have a word wall and a sound wall, or just a sound wall?
My gut says just a sound wall, because now I would need to see the exact research on this, but I think a word wall would maybe be better perhaps in a composite notebook where students are adding vocabulary, but really we want the students to be focusing on, particularly in those lower level grades, the K1 and 2, I think the more crucial component would be their ability to conceptualize the different graphemes associated with the sound. So I would say sound wall would take precedence over a word wall.
Another question is, where would J fall on the chart? I don't see it, but I know that it can sound like a G sometimes.
Absolutely. So I didn't tuck it on there. I think I just pulled out some of the common ones. So let's see here. So I would probably tuck my J. Let's see here. I'd probably put him right here. And then what I would do under the J, so I'm going to have obviously the letter J, which represents the sound J. But underneath that, I would also have G, because G also can make the sound J. And then I would also have DGE, which again can also make the sound J. So he would certainly be on here in some of these consonant sounds. And I would definitely, before I just added up those spellings, I would make sure that I had explicitly taught my students exactly when to use that. So J goes up there. Good call.
Nice. And then another one we also have is, do you use and or recommend specific curriculum for teaching phonics?
Sure, those are great questions. So there's a variety of wonderful phonics curriculums out there, and what you want to look for is a curriculum that is going to align with the principles of structured literacy. So we want really explicit, really direct instruction. I really like Wilson Fund. I know that BrainSpring has a great curriculum. I love Spire, S-P-I-R-E, has some really great phonics materials. If you want just an individual workbook that perhaps to do at home, I like Explode the Code. It's really systematic, and it has some great repetition that sort of goes through each of these graphemes and et cetera. be happy to come up with a list, but off the top of my head, I would say Wilson, Brainspring, Spire, of course, the letters training, and by Dr. Louisa Moats would be an amazing place to start with that. But there are a tremendous amount out there. But as you're sort of researching, look through that lens of, does it align with the concept of structured literacy? Is it systematic, direct, multisensory instruction?
Wonderful. I don't see any others unless someone is typing as I speak.
Which they might be. So, and what I'll say is anyone is welcome to shoot me an email. My email is jenny@openmindliteracy.com if you have questions about this, or you can email us over at North Carolina branch of IDA. We'd be happy to chat further. If you have a particular question about a student that you want to run by me, I'm happy to answer that perhaps at a later time. So I really appreciate you all's attention, and I hope I gave you some valuable information. I hope that today you had a bit of a paradigm shift when it came to reading instruction. The letters are certainly important, and we need them and we love them. I want you to know that reading instruction really starts with speech. So when you think through that and how you present that information to your student, I think that is a valuable piece that will perhaps alter the way you're including phonics in your literacy instruction. And if there are no more questions, I will let you all enjoy your evening. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Hope everyone has a great night.
Thanks, guys. And I'll stick around if anyone has questions. I can hang out for a bit.
One question was, with your sound wall, do you use words and a picture as well?
Sure. So I would say, so I kind of put this together simply. I would use a keyword picture for some of these sounds. So I would perhaps do book for bat, and perhaps or bird, or I would use a keyword that really authentically represents that sound. I probably would not include actual words. I would really just want the picture, the keyword picture, to help the students associate the sound, if that makes sense.
What suggestions do you have for teaching virtually?
Ooh, so many. There's amazing resources out there for online multisensory instruction. So I happen to use Zoom as a platform. I share the screen with my students. I share the remote control. Shoot me an email at jenny@openmindliteracy, and I can send you a list of my favorite. I use book widgets, I use WordWall, I use Google Slides. So it's definitely, it's possible to do. It takes a little bit of planning, but you can certainly keep those components of structured literacy in place over the computer.
Someone's asking for your email again. I'm just gonna
Yeah, do you mind adding it in there? It's just jennie@openmindliteracy.com.
All right, so I'm sending it under the questions, but I'm sending it to all.
Sure, that sounds great. Yeah, I'll take any questions, and I can follow up with anyone that.
Does a lot of this knowledge also apply to ELL or ESL students, or would you teach that differently?
So I've never done extensive training in ELL, but for what I know based on colleagues, et cetera, is that there are a lot of similarities, because when you think about teaching reading, it's all language based. I tell my students at Queens, to consider this a foreign language class. Consider yourself in a position to be learning to crack the code of a language that just happens to be the one that we speak. So I would imagine that a lot of the principles align with ELL as we break down the language into individual components to teach our students. So though I can't say for certain because I don't have a formal background in ELL, I can't imagine that the work done in this arena would differ tremendously from ELL work.
Those are all I see right now.
So what I will do is, I know people are just headed on their way out, but I do just want to quickly show, I forgot I had this. I just want to show a quick example, and anyone who needs to leave, no problem. But I just want to show a quick example of a great way to teach the alphabet that directly goes back to our sound letter correspondence. So I'll just play this clip briefly, and anyone who needs to leave can, and then we'll end from there if you all don't mind. So here we go. This is the phonics dance by Ginny Dowd.
Hi, I'm Ginny Dowd. It's time for the pre-K and beginning of the year kindergarten alphabet. Let's do it phonics dance style. Are you ready? Ah, 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 Abby is sad. Ah, ah, ah is A. Wah, b, b, is baby, baby. B, b, b is B. C says K. C says K. C says K. Cat, meow. D, d, d. I'm a digging dog. D, d, d. I'm a digging dog. D, d, d is D. Hands in motion like an engine coming down a track. Eddie loves his teddy and Eddie loves E. Froggy loves flies. Froggy loves flies. Is F. Give me your goat horns. G, g, g is goat. Goat. G, g, g is G. Blow that hot air. Is happy, happy, happy. I am happy. Is H. Let's dot that I. It dotted, it dotted, it. Iggy loves her wiggy and Iggy loves I. J, j, j. Jumping, jumping, jumping. J, j, j is J. Let's be kissing kangaroos. K, k, k. Kissing kangaroos. K, k, k. Kissing kangaroos. K, k, k. Is K. And blow me a kiss. Is loud lion. Is L. Be a mean monster and really scare me. Mean monster. Is M. Is nice, nice, nice. Jenny is nice. Is N. Ready? Is opera. Opera. Is O. Sing opera for me. Opera. Beg me for some popcorn. Pop, pop, pop. Popcorn, please. Pop, pop, pop. Is P. Quack, quack, quack is queen. Plop. Quack, quack, quack is Q. Your Highness. Look outside. No rain at recess. No rain at recess. Is R. Where do you get smart? At school. I am smart at school. I am smart at school. Is S. Is teacher, teacher, teacher. Mrs. Dowd is my teacher. Is T. Let's point up. Fussy, funny, Tim's underwear. Is you. How about this one? Fussy, funny, Abby's umbrella. Is you. Give me your V. Is violin. Violin. Is V. Give me your W. What is watermelon? Take a bite. What is W? What does X say? X says X. X says X. X says X. The X-ray's in the box. Yup. Is yakking. Yup. Is Y. Let's sing. I will not yak today. I will not yak today. Hi-ho the dairy-o. I will not yak today. Finally, zip your zipper. Z is zipper. Zip. Z is Z.
Okay, there was one last opportunity to see sound symbol relationship in action. So I hope you all enjoyed tonight, and thanks for joining me.